Good morning, and welcome to Speaking of Gas this morning, a weekly look at what matters to you, the owner of oil and gas rights in Pennsylvania. So today I am going to talk about two things. The monthly production report for unconventional wells, and then this week I'm going to take a look at owning oil and gas rights in Pennsylvania, the basics. And I have a presentation that I've done before for that. I may get through part of it, and if I do, I'll continue the second part next week. So first of all, I'm going to take a quick look at this month's production report that came out on the 15th of February for December's production. And okay, so and here is a list of the 25 top wells ranked. And this week, I'm not seeing a lot of changes from the week or the prior month. So there's, not a lot. We focused on the Shumhurst well. We looked at some reports from that last month. But if you notice, I thought this was kind of interesting. The wells in green are all northeast: Bradford, Susquehanna, Wyoming, Sullivan counties. And there were just 3 in the top 25 that were from the Southwest, and that was Greene County. And actually, all 3 of them are from the barley wine pad. So could be any number of reasons for that, whether those wells are actually producing less or just turned down to produce less. It's kind of hard to know that. These are in the Northeast, over in that eastern section of the eastern counties of Bradford, Tioga. I'm sorry, not Tioga, Bradford, Susquehanna, Wyoming, Sullivan. We're seeing all Marcellus wells over there. When you get into Tioga County, we're seeing Utica. We see a lot of Utica down in the Southwest. So really nothing else to report there. Just the list that looks pretty much like last month. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is I'm still not real smooth at navigating from document to document. Maybe that will come in time. I know it's been suggested that I get my grandson to help me out with my production issues. So now I'm going to talk about owning oil and gas rights in Pennsylvania. And this is pretty basic. If you don't know the things I'm talking about, that's not intended to insult you. There's always lots to learn about this. And sometimes we need to be reminded of some things. So I'm going to pull up the presentation that I did last year on this, and it's Owning Oil and Gas Rights in Pennsylvania 101. So America is the land of privately owned oil and gas and mineral rights. And what does that mean to you in Pennsylvania? Oil and gas rights ownership is a little bit different everywhere. Pennsylvania's Drake well was drilled in 1859. That was the first commercial oil well in the world. And oil and gas production now occurs in 32 states. There is a lot of oil production still, or there is still a lot of oil wells producing in Pennsylvania, although I don't think that we're very significant in oil production. It does occur in 32 states, and saying that, there are 32 versions of laws and regulations pertaining to oil and gas. So I'm going to focus on Pennsylvania and what things apply to you in Pennsylvania as the owner of oil and gas rights. So the things to consider when you're dealing with your oil and gas rights, and some of this has to do with putting your tools together to effectively manage your rights. So getting clear on your ownership of oil and gas rights, leasing if you're at that stage or past that stage, whether you may sell some or all of your oil and gas rights, the permitting process, completion, and then royalties. It's kind of the stages that you go through. Some of these you have no control over, some of them you do. Some of them are just about gathering the information for that stage. So in Pennsylvania, oil, gas, and mineral rights, OGM, if you see that acronym, are often referred to as simply mineral rights. And across the country, I want to say, any place probably west of here, they'll refer to your rights as mineral rights. But it's important to realize in Pennsylvania that oil and gas rights and mineral rights are distinctly different. A reference to just mineral rights does not include oil and gas. And again, vice versa, if there's only a reference to oil and gas, it doesn't include mineral rights. There are parts of the country where conveying mineral rights includes all. So you have to be very careful of that wording. And this presentation is only going to focus on oil and gas rights. So defining your ownership. Fee simple ownership is you own the surface and the oil and gas rights beneath. A lot of, and I'll speak often of our Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Landowner Alliance, a lot of our members do own their acreage fee simple. Farmers that own a lot of acreage, in many cases, own everything. But we also have some very large owners, particularly people that have bought rights or have inherited rights. They have the oil and gas rights only. The rights have been severed, and the owner of those rights will typically have the right to develop, and that right trumps the surface rights, unless you've got a restrictive document that says otherwise. And surface only. The oil and gas rights have been severed, and the owner will typically have to allow development by the owner of the oil and gas rights. I think I talked about it last week. I actually have seen several deeds lately where the surface rights have been preserved when selling the oil and gas rights. And there's some cases where you can do that without diminishing the value of that sale. So that's something that you definitely want to be aware of. Deeds. So a deed is the record of ownership. The question is, which deed is the record of your ownership? Many deeds do not mention oil and gas rights, and that in itself does not indicate whether or not they are included. And for people that really had not really given much thought to oil and gas rights in their decades or whatever of owning the property, they're sometimes making assumptions about what is in their deed. And so if a deed does not mention it, the only way to know for sure is to go back and do a title search. We could have oil and gas rights that were severed, let's say in the early 1900s, and there was a deed originally, and then it falls off the deed. So it conveys the surface. Might have language about subject to prior deeds. However, there may be no mention of the fact that the oil and gas rights are no longer with it. Or if they were severed, what percentage was severed at that time. So only a title search will tell you that for sure. And unfortunately, there are people throughout the shale that have been surprised by the fact that they don't own them. They're also, because that's kind of a murky area in Pennsylvania, I believe, since they don't have to carry forward, that there have been a lot of court cases battling over who does own the oil and gas rights. It's not always immediately clear. So a standard title search will not warrant the ownership of oil and gas rights. An oil and gas search would be required. When they are drilling a well, a company will typically go back to, I believe the date is 1850s, maybe 1858, to feel that they have a complete title search that without question says that the person that they have leased indeed owns the oil and gas rights. And Pennsylvania, lacks a system to accurately track oil and gas rights. I think it would be a huge benefit to everyone if that could be more clear. Now, when I began the presentation, there was a slide up telling you how to ask questions if you wanted to. And I think I can pull that up. I think you can see my whole screen right now. And if you look down in this lower right-hand corner where the triangle, circle, and square is, there's a question and answer box where you can type questions in. So I'd be happy to answer those if there are any through the presentation. So the next thing is, what's your tract acreage? Measuring what you own. The meets and bounds system is used in Pennsylvania to determine boundaries. An old description may have relied on natural landmarks that no longer exist. We still see that. We see measurements in chains. We see references to trees. And if you haven't hired a new survey on your property, your deed could look like this. Modern surveys will more accurately depict the acreage. And very often I hear from people, I have more acreage than my deed states. Now, people haven't been willing to run to the courthouse and have that corrected, because then they're going to pay more taxes on a larger acreage, although it's probably not really that significant. However, if you want to be paid on that higher number to calculate a lease bonus or your acreage in a unit, etc., you really should have a deed, or excuse me, a survey conducted and make the deed correction. And, with the old warrants, as they were divided up, it's not unusual to gain 6% of acreage in your property when you do an actual survey of it. So understanding exactly what you own and where it is important. So you own it, now what? The next step is, if you want to be part of this project, process, you're going to want to lease your oil and gas rights. So that lease is between you and the operator. Pennsylvania, this is important. This is where we start talking about what we have or don't have in laws in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania does not regulate leasing. And the only time it comes up at all is conservation wells, which I'll talk about later. You're only protected by what's stated in the lease. And the Oil and Gas Act of 1979 does guarantee you a minimum of 12.5% royalty. However, it is clear that the royalty may be reduced to below 12.5% and even to zero. And hopefully that's a thing of the past, by deductions, unless the lease terms prevent it. Of course, even a solid no deduction lease clause has been ignored by some operators. So our organization, again, POGLA, has been working on this. There's currently a Supreme Court case, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court case, that we thought might have been decided last fall. It's in the court now. Maybe we'll get a decision hopefully this spring. And that would give possibly further clarification here. And when we move forward with legislation to protect this, that court case and the final decision is going to dictate what that might look like. So you own it, now what? Now, last week I talked about selling your oil and gas rights. And, I won't dwell on this. You can sell your entire property, surface, oil and gas rights, everything done and over. You can sell the surface with all or a portion of the rights. This way you have the right to lease and collect royalties on the retained interest. You can sell just the oil and gas rights or a portion of, and retaining a portion allows you to maintain control over the surface through lease clauses. And you also can sell some or all of your future royalties. So selling your oil and gas rights, one last note, I wish I had nickel for every time a seasoned, savvy owner said never sell your oil and gas and mineral rights. And I was thinking the other day how I've never heard anyone say, gosh, I am so glad I am rid of those oil and gas rights. So that's another way to think about it. It's a personal decision. The important piece is to know the current and future value of what you're selling. And too often the decision is made without understanding the potential. So you own it, now what? Do nothing. Yes, you can choose not to accept any offer to lease, but consider wells drilled above the Onondaga horizon have no setback rules. The Marcellus and Burkett formations are above the Onondaga. Once a well is drilled, to deviate around your unleased parcel, you'll likely be left out, period. And there are options to prevent any surface activity on your land if that's your concern. In the case of a conservation well, forced integration could apply, and that'll be discussed later. This is a favorite slide that we've had for years. I'll give you 500 clams to let me drill on your land. Well, I don't know. The drill only takes up half an acre. You have 50. You won't even notice it's there. Well, that sounds reasonable. And so, you end up with that pump jack, drill rig, whatever in front of your door. A little exaggerated, but, it comes down to this. Everything is negotiable. Those are my three rules of leasing. Everything is negotiable. So leasing considerations. You want to protect your intended use. You want to address the royalty percentage, deductions, commencement of operations, a pew clause to protect you from having all your acreage tied up with just a few in a unit, what the term is. Unitization is an important thing. Surface restrictions, storage, warranty of title, unit size, etc. There's a lot of things to consider. And really, if you're doing a non-surface option lease, you might not have a lot of addendums, but certainly if you have a surface lease, you should have a lengthy list of addendums to protect you. The only thing that's guaranteed is what's in the lease. So what to expect after the lease is signed? If you have a pad on your surface, you'll receive notification. And if your lease requires consultation on siting, that's an opportunity for you. The operator needs your surface for other activities, you'll receive notification. Or if you have a water source within 2,500 or 3,000 feet of a wellbore. You're on your own with notification if any laterals drilled from a pad not on your surface, including laterals that pass directly under your oil and gas rights are drilled. You're on your own to know the spud dates, completion dates, and commencement of production. So you need to know where to find that. So what to expect from lease to royalty? And this kind of wrap, I guess it doesn't have some more slides. So you're going to lease. The first thing that you might see out there is an area of review summary report. If you're not being notified by the company they want to drill on you, and then you would see a DEP well permit at some point. If you are the landowner with surface use, you get notification, or if your lease requires it otherwise. If they need consent for surface use, they'll contact you. Then they're going to spud the well, drill it, drill the vertical, the horizontal, frack it, complete it, and produce it. And then as you move through, at some point, you may see a division order. The company will record a unit declaration, and then you should see royalty payments. And thanks to work by POGLA, we do have some rules now and what they have to put in the royalty statements that you receive to make them more transparent. We need some rules on providing unit declarations to landowners. We do not have that yet. So earlier I talked about the Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Conservation Law. There aren't many laws that apply to you, the landowner, who is, in my opinion, I guess the operator is probably the most important stakeholder in this, because without them, we have nothing. But I would say that the owner of the oil and gas rights is number 2 in importance as a stakeholder, and we rarely get that designation. So the conservation law does exist. It's specifically, the law only applies to wells which penetrate the Onondaga horizon or 3,800 feet below the surface, where that horizon is closer to the surface than 3,800 feet. And in those permits, the permit must indicate that the well bore is more than 330 feet from an unleased boundary. And so theoretically, they shouldn't be getting a permit unless they have everything within 330 feet leased. This is the only time that DEP is concerned with leasing. They don't examine leases. It's just a checkbox on the form that everything is leased. And so this is just a log of formations from a particular well that shows here. There's the Marcellus and the Geneseo where the Burkett is. Here's the Onondaga limestone, kind of in the middle of these. And then there's the Utica shale below, and the Trenton Black River below that. So it's only the wells drilled to these depths that are affected by this. And there is a provision to allow the department to integrate through voluntary or involuntary compulsion interest in oil and gas and development on a conservation well. It's only been tested once in the state. It went through some preliminary work in the courts. And then after a year, the company, I would say, cried uncle, and then decided to develop without those and around those. Again, they have to deviate a well bore, so it's not within 330 feet of those properties, and drilled in a way that could allow, actually a landowner could also file to be integrated. So in my opinion, we should have a pooling law, fair pooling, that would apply to all the formations above and below the Onondaga Formation that have the potential to aggregate a large number of acres, so that we had some rules on how they had to be spaced and how the landowners were treated there. I don't see that in the immediate future. That can also be helpful to companies in cases where you've got operators operating shallow wells and they've got to now work together to do the deep wells. That could be helpful to them too. I just said a lot about a complicated subject there in a few short sentences. Again, I mentioned the area of review summary. That's a preliminary step in the permit process. And that's just an example of it. The location plat. This is page 4 of the well permit, and it will either plainly show the lateral location or provide coordinates to plot. There's another place where I believe that we should have some clear rules that say this is what they should look like, showing roads and parcels so that a landowner can, without question, know where that wellbore is in relation to their property. This is an example of a unit declaration that's filed in the county recorder's office before royalties are paid typically, and then they can be amended and are amended often. We see a lot of that with cross-unit laterals that are being drilled. You should have a copy of the first filing and all amendments in your file. We've talked before about unconventional production reports. There is a law that says they have to report monthly on the 15th for the preceding 2 months. And conventional wells do have a 5-year confidentiality period, and then thereafter required to report. So this is something that should be in your toolbox. So wrapping this up, you need to understand, this is the basics of owning oil and gas rights in Pennsylvania. Understand what you own, understand what rules there are in place to protect you, that companies have to abide by. Do your homework before signing the lease so you have a document that is going to protect your interest down the road for you, children, other heirs in the future. And then, is selling oil and gas rights right for you? You really need to understand that fully if that's what you're thinking of doing. And then know what to expect after the lease. Understand permitting and completions. I always say that I think the best way to feel like you're more in control, if you ever are, is to have realistic expectations about what this process is going to look like. You know, if you think you're going to call the company and someone's going to pick up the phone and say, well, hello, Jackie, we're so glad to hear from you. What can we do for you today? That's not typically going to happen. You're going to leave your information, and then a good operator should get back to you right away. But it's helpful to know that instead of, people get frustrated right off the bat if they are calling the company and not getting immediate responses. So have a realistic set of expectations. So understand the process and then get ready to collect the royalties. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Let me go back to my window. I'm not seeing any questions in the box. And of course, you're welcome to send any questions to me at any time. And I'm always interested in hearing from you if there's a topic you'd like me to talk about. Consider, again, joining POGLA, the Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Landowner Alliance, and think seriously about attending our conference on April 28th, 9th, and 30th this year. We'll have an array of speakers and vendors, lots of good conversation and networking to learn more about things like owning your oil and gas rights and how to manage them. So that'll do it for this week. Thanks for tuning in.